last night because I'm supposed to go back for stuff. He's up at University of Michigan and he does emergency. He's working in Flint. See, now they got, so they shut down the whole University of Michigan because he's prohibited from international travel there just for a change. So I said, well, and then I had a guy. The committee will come to order. Today we will be hearing testimony from our colleagues in the House of Representatives relative to their concerns. We would like to learn from them and their experiences, also to potentially help with any needs that they see, whether it be in their district, state, or the nation. Before we begin with our friend and colleague, Mr. Williams from Texas, I would point out for the record that three of our colleagues have submitted written testimony for the record. Congressman Ron Estes from Kansas, Congressman Buddy Carter from Georgia, who usually is able to join us, as well as Congressman Tom Suozzi from the state of New York. Mr. Williams, the floor is yours. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, and my friend my colleague from Texas. I'll be brief today, and there's a lot going on, but Chairman Ranking Visklowski and Ranking Member Calvert, I thank you for the opportunity to testify before this subcommittee and for all that you do for our men and women in uniform. Today, I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about Fort Hood, about the military's readiness and what's needed to continue America's superiority in the future. Fort Hood, we know, is the great place that is commonly known, is home to over 36,000 soldiers and airmen, with thousands of troops currently deployed in South Korea, Europe, Afghanistan, and the Middle East in support of global combat, peacekeeping, and humanitarian operations. Our soldiers bring to Central Texas over 48,000 family members, making Fort Hood one of the largest and most populous military installations in the world. Its economic contributions are also significant, delivering roughly $25 billion to the Texas economy last year. And I'd also would like to call attention to North Fort Hood, home to the 1st Army Division West and a staple in my district. Division West serves as a critical function in the pre, post, and demobilization operations, a mission that has likely affected your state's U.S. Army Reserve or National Guard units in some way. I encourage this committee to make every possible dollar available to support this critical mission. As the DoD and FORSCOM continue to rely on the U.S. Army Reserve and National Guard units to supplement manpower shortages, we must ensure that we are providing the training, funding, and resources available to maintain their effectiveness and lethality on the battlefield. The modernization of our force is pivotal in our ability to develop the force of the future, and I remain supportive of every effort to build the most lethal and modern fighting force on the planet. With that said, if there were an opportunity to identify specific defense accounts that don't require an increase this year but are projected to have one, I hope that instead of returning the entirely to the defense account, the full committee would consider providing a reasonable percentage towards MILCON projects that have been pending or underfunded far too long. Fort Hood's top priorities continue to be improvements to barracks, motor pools, and aircraft hangars. Each one of these infrastructure types are critical for the health and welfare of the soldiers, as well as their professional ability to carry out their assigned duties. And I hope that when 302B levels are determined, that there will be significant plus-ups in the MILCON account for these projects. In the same way that I hope that there will be practical increases in the subcommittee's jurisdiction. Lastly, I trust this committee will continue to prioritize the overall modernization and readiness of the total force, and most importantly, to not sacrifice one for the other. Last year, the Army Futures Command stood up in Austin, Texas. In their own words, Army Futures Command, or AFC, is on a quest to modernize the way the Army does business by creating a space of endless possibilities to explore, develop, and test new methods, organizations, and technologies. Above all else, we want to make sure soldiers have what they need before they need it to protect tomorrow, today. These innovations within the DoD are essential to modernizing the force and utilizing the expertise and solutions that will put combat enablers on the field of battle in less time and at a better cost. I hope the utmost of consideration will be given to AFC and that our defense committees will ensure that they have the talent and resources necessary to achieve their mission. In order to do that, we must guarantee that they can hire top talent through already existing streamlined hiring processes that provide competitive compensation and long-term retention strategies. There are countless Americans who are excited for the opportunity to serve their country in this innovative field. It is our future. Our goal should be to welcome these talents, not create barriers to entry. In May of 2018, I had the privilege of traveling to Iraq and Kuwait with my colleague and ranking member of MilCon VA Subcommittee, Chairman John Carter, who I am honored to represent Fort Hood with him. During our travels, I enjoyed spending time with our 3 Corps soldiers deployed to the region as part of Operation Inherent Resolve. The experience is one that I will never forget. I will always treasure and reaffirm why our tireless advocacy for the military in this body is so vitally important. America's adversaries are working every day to defeat us, and if we're tested, we must be prepared to deliver a resounding response of American strength and resolve. We cannot afford to put Band-Aids on a problem and hope that we can keep a helicopter, a plane, a ship, or a tank in use for another day past its prime. The investment in our modernization is key not only to maintaining a competitive edge against our near peers and terrorists, but to guarantee the safety of our service members who so selfishly volunteer to get behind the stick of that helicopter or the wheel of that ship. We have a long-standing bipartisan tradition of coming together to provide the Pentagon with the resources necessary to fight and win in any domain, and I'm committed to continuing that cooperation. Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member, thank you again for providing me the opportunity to discuss the defense priorities on Fort Hood and throughout the DoD. Your steadfast support for our service, men and women, does not go unnoticed. The United States of America has the greatest military in the world has ever known, and it is the honor of my lifetime to represent our service members in Congress. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member. I yield my time back.
Mr. Williams, thank you very much for your testimony. I certainly hear a clear bell here on the military construction accounts. We share that concern, and also the investment as far as the mobilization platforms I think are critical, because you want to make sure everyone is as safe and as effective as they can be. So certainly appreciate that. As I think I asked last year, though, are you still showing Judge Carter the way?
Oh, naturally. It's part of the hardest thing I do in Congress, but I'm still at it.
Well, I want to thank the gentleman. I've been to Fort Hood. It's a wonderful facility, and the men and women who serve there are fabulous, and I'm sure you're very proud of them, as the rest of the country is. And go Dodgers. Thank you.
You're with a winner. Thank you. God bless.
Mr. Secretary, I also want to thank you for what you and John Carter do to represent that area. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Williams, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McGovern?
Thank you very much. I'm sorry I'm late. We're in Rules Committee, and
You're on time.
we're on hold right now. So, but I want to thank you, Chairman Visklosky, Ranking Member Calvert, for giving me the opportunity to talk about a few of my priorities for the FY 21 Defense Appropriations Act. First, I respectfully ask the committee to honor the service of a specific cohort of former members of the armed forces who were exposed to radiation during the years following World War II, known collectively as atomic veterans. Specifically, I ask the committee to provide $4 million for the creation and distribution of an Atomic Veteran Service Medal. You know, year after year, House-passed language to create this medal has been stripped from the NDAA final conference reports. This is particularly galling when the provision has received overwhelming bipartisan support in the House for years. For 5 years, my good friend and Republican colleague Tom Emmer and I offered this provision as an amendment, receiving unanimous votes in the House. And last year, the provision was included in the base text of the House NDAA. So in light of this, I respectfully ask the committee to take the lead and provide the necessary funding to honor these veterans with a service medal. As you know, between 1945 and 1962, about 225,000 members of our armed forces participated in hundreds of nuclear weapons tests. Thousands of other GIs were exposed to dangerous levels of radiation as part of the U.S. military occupation forces in Japan, and those who were POWs in and around Hiroshima and Nagasaki. All were sworn to secrecy, unable to talk to their doctors about their exposure to radiation. And the Pentagon stubbornly refuses to honor their service, arguing that it would somehow diminish other military personnel tasked with dangerous missions. Mr. Chair and members of this committee, that's just ridiculous and it's offensive. So this is a unique group of veterans. No other cohort has been recognized for specialized testing and treatment by the Department of Veterans Affairs. No other cohort has been recognized by 3 former presidents for their unique service. President Reagan designated July 16, 1983 as Atomic Veterans Day. President George H.W. Bush recognized them as a discrete cohort of American veterans eligible for compensation under the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act of 1990, and President Clinton issued a public apology in 1995 following the Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments landmark report. So it is beyond comprehension for the Pentagon to assert that these veterans are just like any other veteran who faced hazardous duty. They are not. In 2007, our allies Great Britain, New Zealand, and Australia awarded such medals to their atomic veterans who served alongside our GIs. There's no reason for us not to do the same. Tragically, upwards of 80% of American atomic veterans have already passed away, never having received this recognition. So, Mr. Chairman, we can't wait any longer to honor them. Please recognize this unique group of veterans, their sacrifice and selfless service. Please fund and create an Atomic Veterans Service Medal, please, before they all pass away. Time is running out. Second, I want to thank you for your consistent support of the Wounded Warriors Service Dog Grants Program. Since FY 2015, this committee has led the way in creating and funding this program that provides grants to qualified nonprofits to offset the cost of training service dogs for our veterans. I ask that you continue funding this program at $11 million, the same as last year. And finally, I would like to thank the committee for recognizing the importance of prioritizing research to address enteric disease, or ETEC, in last year's bill. For FY 2021, I asked the committee to provide $10 million under Navy RDT and E medical development to support ETEC research. Among our service members deployed around the world, ETEC is the leading cause of bacterial diarrhea. It results in millions of days of diminished readiness. It incapacitates a service member for 3 to 5 days, and half of all affected report decreased job performance afterwards. So 1 in 10 will develop post-infection bowel problems. So the Navy, DARPA, and academic partners have made significant progress in developing effective countermeasures, but without further funding, the antibodies developed will not go on to the next stages of development and testing. So it's urgent that the committee advance this research, which will benefit literally tens of thousands of our uniformed men and women deployed abroad. So, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I want to thank you. I appreciate your hard work, and that concludes my testimony.
Mr. McKim, thank you very much for your testimony and your concerns. I would point out that we will do our very best to maintain the funding for the military service dogs. You were an advocate last year, and we did provide some funds for the Atomic Veterans Service Medal, but as you know, and I know you're working with the Authorization Committee too, we still have to solve that particular part, but would want to stay in touch with that committee as well as yourself to see if we can have some success. So again, really, you've got a full plate, and appreciate you taking the time to be down here. Mr. Calvert?
Thank the gentleman for his testimony, and certainly concerned about the atomic veterans. I knew one myself. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, like most of them, but they certainly should be recognized. And certainly, the dogs that go to service are necessary in times of war, and they should be treated properly. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Certainly on the military dogs, it's something that we support, and we'll work with you on that. Thank you for pointing that out.
I should just say the support that you have provided over the years in terms of grant assistance to help train these dogs have benefited countless veterans and literally changed their lives. I would argue even saved their lives. So thank you for your great work. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Visklosky, Ranking Member Calvert, members of the subcommittee. Really appreciate this opportunity to be here today to discuss the pressing needs at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and the surrounding community. As many of you know, Fort Bragg is a very special and unique place, fondly referred to as the epicenter of the universe. It's not only home to the airborne and special operation forces, but also our nation's largest military installation in terms of personnel, which is a fight I have with Judge Carter, who has the largest base, I believe, by land mass. Each of these commands and their subordinate units are specifically designed to meet the most unique challenges facing our nation. Simply put, when the President calls 911, the phone rings at Fort Bragg, as they are the tip of the spear. One of these units, the 82nd Airborne Division, has a unique designation as the Immediate Response Force, in which they must be able to deploy anywhere in the world within 18 hours. Combine this with the increased reliance on Special Operation Forces over the last 20 years, and it's clear that Fort Bragg deploys more personnel to more countries on shorter notice than anyone else. Maintaining such a capability requires investments in not only lethality and modernization, but also in the infrastructure to make it all work, which has not been sufficiently funded. Our men and women in uniform cannot win the next fight if they can't get there quickly and safely. Fort Bragg is at a critical juncture. Our primary and alternative airfields, rail systems, roads, training areas, maintenance facilities, and infrastructure are in desperate need. The roads that connect Fort Bragg with neighboring communities serve a disproportionately high concentration of our special operation forces, and their families are in utter disrepair. The roads are so bad, they cost Fort Bragg $2.5 million annually in accident and death payments alone. The state of North Carolina wants to take over maintenance of these roads, but needs the Army to first raise them to state standards. That alone would cost approximately $43 million. Unfortunately, conventional forces at Fort Bragg, including the 82nd, have suffered from a lack of MILCON funding, receiving only one project since 2010. With this in mind, the command has been forced to try to mitigate the effects of this financial drought by utilizing facility sustainment, restoration, and modernization, FSRM funding. This applies to barracks that had their roofs ripped off during recent hurricanes, motor pools that can't physically fit modern vehicles, and an airfield that desperately needs resurfacing. The fact is we're dangerously close to losing the capabilities that our nation relies on. During the recent rapid deployment of the 82nd on New Year's Eve, the lights on the runway that have been there since 1938 actually failed. One of the most concerning issues to me is that the Department of Defense won't even request what is identified as true needs. For years, they've been forced to undercut themselves and request less than 100% of their requirement. This year, that request has come to 81% of the actual need. I urge the committee to see what effect this is having on the force. I understand we have limited resources to fund competing priorities and acknowledge that members of this committee have done an exceptional job at finding that very tough balance. Yet, as Fort Bragg's Congressman, I'm here to tell you these decisions have a cost that is jeopardizing the safety of our men and women in uniform. With this in mind, I would ask that the committee fund the FSRM budget for the Army at the highest levels possible. Additionally, I'd like to bring your attention to a program within U.S. SOCOM known as the Preservation of the Force and Family, or POTF. POTF was established to create a holistic approach to address pressures on the force and increase stress on operators' families. This program touches all aspects of the operator: physical, mental, social, and spiritual. The success of POTF is demonstrated through a notable decrease in the rate of physical and emotional injuries from all causes, significantly accelerating return to duty times, increasing retention, and improving overall morale of the force to include their families. POTF is the embodiment of the soft truth that people are our most valuable asset. As you know, it takes years to build a special operator, special forces operator. The demands of SOF continue throughout their career and are compounded by high deployment and to dwell ratio. Simply put, the demand is there and the job isn't getting any easier. Thankfully, programs like POTF are exactly what we need to be able to maintain a ready force. I ask this committee fund the POTF program as robustly as possible. Finally, I'd like to highlight a relatively small but extremely valuable program from the Department of Defense. As you know, the Department of Education administers the Impact Aid program to provide financial assistance to compensate for the lost tax revenue for school districts that contain federal property. Similarly, the Department of Defense Education Activity administers a supplemental DoD Impact Aid program. As you can imagine, each of the counties surrounding Fort Bragg are recipients of Impact Aid, which serves as a critical lifeline to school districts that would otherwise lose funding they desperately need. In fiscal year 20, the Department of Defense included $40 billion of supplemental funding for the program and a separate $10 million for additional funding for children with severe disabilities. Fort Bragg is one of the few installations across the country that has an exceptional family member program for children with special needs. As such, families from across the country are stationed here solely based on the fact that their children need access to these resources. Because not all these children are in schools on post, the DoD Impact Aid for children with severe disabilities is increasingly important for our communities. With this in mind, I would ask you to continue to build on the progress made in last year's Defense Appropriations Bill and further increase both the DoD Impact Aid Supplemental and DoD Impact Aid for children with severe disabilities when looking at fiscal year 2021. Again, I'd like to thank you, Chairman Voskowski and Ranking Member Calvert, for allowing me to testify today, and I stand ready to answer any questions you might have.
Mr. Hudson, thank you very much for taking the time to appear. Do appreciate your commitment, one, to national defense, as well as the United States Army, and attentive to the needs in your district. Would point out, and I'm an infrastructure guy, I'm from Gary, Indiana, that for facilities, sustainment, repair, and maintenance in fiscal year 20, we increased the budget by $600 million for the Army's line to a total of $4.1 billion. I regret that the administration only asked for 3.5. Not that that's not a lot of money, but it's a cut. So we are aware of that, appreciate your concern. Also share your concern, we all do, on impact aid. I don't have that particular issue in my district, but it is immediately across the line and deal with people who have that issue. And again, would just point out that in this year's bill, we increased impact aid from the department by $50 million. And also, and you mentioned, I appreciate that, children with disabilities, we increased that account this year for $20 million. No one knows what the future holds, but obviously we will do our very best.
Well, I really appreciate that. And again, you know, the requests that end up in front of you don't represent the totality of the need. And you don't have enough money to cover all the need that even is presented to the committee. And so you guys have a tough job, you men and women here, and I appreciate the job you do, but keep in mind that you're not even seeing all the need that's out there. And a place like Fort Bragg that hadn't had a milk-on since 2010, the place is
Is
crumbling.
that near where you live, Fort Bragg?
Yeah, well, pretty close, pretty close, yes, sir.
Mr. Calvert?
Well, the men and women that serve at Fort Bragg are at the point of the spear, and we should certainly support them as much as we can, any way we can, and I'll be working with the chairman to do exactly that, and we'll stay in touch to see what we can do under the constraints we have in the appropriations process.
Thank you.
But thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chairman Wisłowski, Ranking Member Calvert, members of the committee. Thank you for hosting today's hearing and giving me the opportunity to discuss two priorities that are very, very important to this subcommittee for fiscal year 2021 appropriations. First, as co-chair of the bipartisan Congressional Ukraine Caucus, I come here today in strong support for robust funding levels for Ukraine in the fiscal year 21. At a minimum, we ask that this committee appropriate funds for Ukraine-related programs at currently enacted levels, but I strongly encourage that these programs receive an increase in funding. It is in our national interest to help Ukraine succeed as a democratic, independent, and prosperous nation, and by strengthening the security of our Central and Eastern European allies in the face of increasing Russian aggression. Our support for Ukraine also stems from our shared values of sovereignty, human rights, and the rule of law. These funds are essential to support Ukraine's democratic progress, military readiness to combat Russian aggression, its civil society capacity to combat corruption, which I personally worked with and experienced over there as my time as an FBI agent, and also efforts to care for Ukraine's veterans, and efforts to boost economic development in key fields such as agriculture and small business. Robust American support remains critical to Ukraine's independence and sovereignty. We especially encourage strong support in the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, which is directed by the Department of Defense. Moreover, I would like to express my support for funding programs that promote transparency and accountability to end corruption, especially programs that strengthen the parliament, judiciary, media, and civil society in Ukraine. Also, to help Ukraine defend its territorial borders and its territorial sovereignty from outside aggression, Russia's illegal seizure of Crimea must never be recognized. Alleviate human suffering, especially in eastern Ukraine, including hundreds of thousands of children who have been displaced. These challenges require comprehensive and bipartisan support, and the United States must continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with the people of Ukraine and provide robust funding for our strategic ally in the region. And I urge the committee to ensure that the necessary funds are appropriated to assist our friends in Ukraine. Secondly, I'd like to turn to an issue that is much closer to home. For several years, I've been working very hard to address the contamination of our drinking water by toxic PFAS chemicals, because I believe these chemicals represent one of the most widespread public health crises we as a nation face. So much so that myself and my friend and colleague Dan Kildee from Michigan co-led and are co-leading a bipartisan PFAS task force to unite all the area members of Congress whose districts have been impacted. Advisory levels, a high percentage, exceedingly high percentage of our drinking water throughout the nation, particularly in some of our districts, contain an exceedingly high percentage of PFAS and PFOA chemicals that exceed the EPA's current lifetime health advisory level of 70 parts per trillion of combined PFOA and PFAS. However, toxicological profiles of these chemicals released by the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry suggest that tens of millions more Americans than previously thought are drinking water with harmful levels of these chemicals. An example of how my constituents have been impacted by this issue is in West Rock Hill Township. In 1986, a team of firefighters from the former Naval Air Station in Willow Grove, Pennsylvania, and also the Naval Air Development Center in Warminster used AFFF spraying trucks to assist firefighting in a massive tire fire. And the AFFF foam is a firefighting foam made up of PFAS chemicals, and now the water supply for many households in West Rock Hill Township tests at some of the highest levels of PFOA and PFAS in the entire nation. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection first started sending notices to affected households in 2016. That means that for 30 years, many were drinking water and bathing their children in water that was poisoned by these highly toxic chemicals with no idea of the harm they were being exposed to, and through no fault of their own. Last July, the Congressional PFAS Task Force led a bipartisan group of lawmakers in sending a letter to the Defense Department, Inspector General, asking the office to examine the Defense Department's use of PFAS at military locations. The IG's office responded that they will be launching a review of the Defense Department's use of PFAS at military sites in Michigan and around the country. It is unacceptable that the Defense Department put the health of families in Pennsylvania and around the nation at risk with these chemicals. Whether it was intended or unintended, every American has the right to clean drinking water, and the federal government created this health crisis, and it's important that the government now take responsibility for that. Our citizens have the right to this, and moreover, the more we learn about these chemicals, the clearer the danger becomes. And as the co-chair of the PFAS task force, it's my firm belief that this committee must appropriate the necessary funds to remediate and clean up contamination from these PFAS chemicals. I thank the committee for their time and attention to these two very important matters, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank the gentleman very much. Both primary issues you've touched on, Ukraine as well as the environmental, are very close to our hearts. Mr. Calvert and I have been to Ukraine, and whether we have been or not, a very, very serious issue. As you probably know, we did include $250 million this year. There's no guarantee for the future, but very alert and very concerned about Ukraine. So do appreciate your position. Additionally, particularly Ms. McCollum has been very, very active on this, is the issue of the water quality issue and the cleanups. Met with the Secretary of the Air Force yesterday, as a matter of fact. It is unclear how much the administration really is looking for. I would point out for the record that for fiscal year 20, they asked for $79 million, which I thought was completely inadequate. The committee added 172 above that. At least two of us, Mr. Calvin and I, serve on energy and water. I tell people environmental management is always a bill payer. It's always less. But people drink that water, whether they're at a base, whether they're in a community, and it is a priority for us, and we'll be very attentive to it. So appreciate your concern. Ms. Keller?
I thank the gentleman, and as you pointed out, I worked with the gentlelady on my prior job that she has now, the jurisdiction over the Environmental Protection Agency, and DOD certainly has a responsibility. This PFAS issue is nationwide. It's a difficult issue to approach. We have programs within EPA like WIFIA and certainly Department of Defense grant programs, but we need to take this on, and it's a big problem. As far as Ukraine is concerned, we agree. I've been a big believer in lethal aid to Ukraine to get Russia's attention. I'm fearful this summer they may try something provocative, so we need to make sure that we are in a good position. So with that, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Just on PFAS, we've got a all-of-government approach that I've been working on with the team in Michigan, and I thank you for the task force that's been, it's made a difference in getting people's attention on this. So we're waiting for the EPA to set a standard. They've been slow to do so. But that standard might not be the final standard. We might have to lower the levels again, even after we have that, because what we're finding out. I have a municipality since 2006 has been filtering water. So it is a problem all across, but the Department of Defense needs to step up, and they need to take responsibility and work with you to remediate this problem. So I look forward to working with you on this.
If the gentlelady would yield too on that, since I point out technology has changed, and I made this point to you and others, that there are technologies that work and are much more effective and gets a cleanup quicker. And I hope the EPA and the Department of Defense and others will pay attention to these new technologies and get it out there.
Well, that's true, but it can be in surface water, it can be in groundwater, it can be in wells, so the technology is all where it is. In my municipalities, we're filtering the waters, but I've been in if you set this room upright, one of these filters is a little smaller than the circumference of this room, but then that has all the nasty stuff in it. And then what do? We landfill it. So we need research, and as the gentleman from California put out, there's lots of different ways to address this. We have to address it. We can't wait for the perfect way to do it. We need to do something right now.
And the filtration issue, as you pointed out, is a separate issue in and of itself, because what do you do with the filters after they're filled? Because there's no safe way that we've been aware of to dispose of these chemicals.
So we need research, we need standards, but we need the Department of Defense to stand up in doing research, in setting safe standards, and in cleaning up these plumes that are so that they don't spread any farther. So it's a serious problem, and thank you for the fight, because it's making a difference. But I was just shocked when the president, after this is bipartisan, bicameral, when the president's budget came out, and I won't say ignored it, but didn't give it the due diligence it deserved.
Thank you very much.
We thank the committee for their
Please do
attention.
stay in touch. We will continue to work on it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks.
Gentleman from New York?
He has different pollution.
I'm so happy to see you. We were told you were not going to appear and simply submit written testimony, and it darkened our day.
Oh, I'm happy to
May
be here
proceed.
myself. Thank you, Mr.
May
Chairman.
proceed.
Thank you for that warm welcome. Mr. Ranking Member, other members of the committee, I really appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today. You all have reputations of being concerned about environmental restoration. We were just talking about PFAS. I'm here to talk to you today about a groundwater plume on Long Island that has contaminated our sole source drinking water aquifer for over 40 years. We've known about it for 40 years, and the Navy is a responsible party, and they can't get out of the way to actually clean it up. So I'm here to advocate for a monumental but necessary $500 million increase in funding in the Environmental Restoration Program in the Department of the Navy. This is a big thing I'm asking for. I'm asking us to really look at something that our community has struggled with for over 40 years. So this money that we're looking for is to remediate environmental degradation stemming from defense-related activities. Congressman Peter King joins me in this bipartisan request. He can't be here today because he's got a function for the St. Patrick's Day at the White House. This funding is essential for the cleanup of contamination at a defense manufacturing site in my district that, again, we've known about for over 40 years, and other similar sites across the country. During World War II and throughout the 1980s, Long Island was a defense industry manufacturing hub. Long Islanders produced the aircraft that helped lead the Allies to victory during World War II. We helped develop the propulsion technology that carried Americans into space and built the lunar module that landed on the moon. We're proud of our contributions to the nation's defense and space exploration, but for over 40 years, again, over 40 years, the pollution that was left behind has contaminated our drinking water. It's spreading rapidly. It's decreased property values, and it's spread fear throughout our communities. The United States Navy and the Grumman Corporation have long been deemed officially to be the responsible parties. We know they're the responsible parties for this contamination, and they're liable for the cleanup. Mr. Chairman, Newsday is our local daily newspaper on Long Island, and I'd like to submit for the record a recent Newsday investigative report entitled The Grumman Plume, Decades of Deceit. The excellent reporting and frustrating details, this is relatively recent that this report came out. This excellent reporting and frustrating detail outlines decades of finger-pointing, bureaucratic delays, high-priced lawyers and engineers, and misdirection, which have resulted in a 4-decade-old problem that is a long way from actual remediation. Recently, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation released a new plan to contain further spread of an underground plume of contamination before it destroys additional drinking water supplies, again, in our sole source aquifer. Instead of a new round of finger-pointing between lawyers and engineers, Congressman King and I are advocating that the U.S. Navy and Grumman stick to their defense-related expertise and instead write a significant check, each of them, the Navy and Grumman, write significant checks to the New York State DEC and the Bethpage water districts so they can implement on a more timely remediation this spreading underground blight before it further harms our island and our people. That's why this additional funding is essential. This plume, which is one of the most complicated in the country, is currently 2.1 miles wide, 4.3 miles long, and goes as much as 900 feet deep, and has contaminated the sole source aquifer drinking water for millions of people on Long Island. To date, the remediation of the Navy Grumman plume has concentrated on cleaning up hotspots and treating drinking water at the wellhead. There has been no plan in place to fully remediate the site, much less contain the plume. Hence, it's continued to spread. The DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation of New York State's bold plan, which includes construction of 16 wells along the perimeter, the southern perimeter of the plume, is estimated to cost $585 million over the next 30 years, and hundreds of millions of dollars more of the existing record of decision to fund the current remediation. The Navy and Grumman are going to have to pay this money. They're going to have to do it. And I'm saying instead of going through the bureaucratic mess that the Navy has to go through, because they're not experts in environmental remediation, the previous Secretary of Navy agreed with me, let's just have them write a check to the local authorities so they can cut through the bureaucracy and get this site cleaned up. The Environmental Restoration Program is a Department of the Navy program initiative to identify, quote, investigate and clean up former waste disposal sites on military property. According to a Department of Defense report, the DoD anticipates that 1,852 sites will still not have achieved resolution complete by the end of fiscal year 2021, the fiscal year we're currently budgeting for, and will still require billions more to address the existing sites. Despite the present backlog, the President's budget proposal cuts this funding by $50 million to the lowest level in 4 years. That cut's unacceptable, as I'm sure you agree, especially when considering that emerging contaminants have already leading to additional sites and growing costs. I'm not going to talk about PFAS. I know other speakers have already spoken about it, but I want to advocate again how important it is for these chemical contaminants to be cleaned up. Emerging contaminants pose a significant risk to the funding for existing sites. As the DoD writes, quote, because the DoD could not plan, program, or budget for the unanticipated costs as part of the typical budget cycle, it used funding that was originally programmed for cleanup activities at other sites, like mine, that will likely lead to delays in achieving response complete at some of those deferred sites. This report goes on to state that the list of sites is not static and will grow by an average of 150 sites a year, and therefore it's unlikely that the DoD will achieve a response. We must not cut funding at this time. In fact, we need a dramatic new solution. We need your help. The people on Long Island are begging for your help. This is a bipartisan request. It's well documented. It's going on for 40 years, and only your help can help resolve this very dramatic problem. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I feel the gentleman's frustration, and I share it. I would suggest there's probably not another member in the House who has more Superfund sites, more contaminated waterways, and other environmental problems in the 1st District of Indiana. I live in Gary, Indiana. We have the Grand Calumet River, which is not grand, but it's a river. And for 100 years, 90% of the water in that river was industrial discharge from 5 refineries and 4 integrated steel mills. As a member of congressional staff for 6 years and as a member for 36 years, we've been trying just to clean up that one site. We've made progress, but we still have 4 reaches of the river to go. And I absolutely appreciate your frustration. I also appreciate your activity because you had an amendment that was adopted in the House. We were able to retain fiscal year 18 on this issue, and would point out, and it's of little consolation to you at this moment, that for the current fiscal year, we increased the administration's request for that account by $49 million. These are problems, as you point out on page 5, the movement of money, because we can't plan and we're going to take money from your account, just isn't going to solve the problem you got. So none of us can promise you anything, but
Mr. Chairman, let me just say
they're
very clearly,
committed
I
to trying to
appreciate,
push the department
I
to clean
appreciate
these
so
up.
much how much you know about this and how passionate you are about this idea of cleanup as well. One of my staffers is one of your former staffers. They've told me about your commitment to this. I've read about your commitment to this, and we're so grateful for the great work that you've done throughout your career on environmental remediation. I just want to point out one thing. The responsible parties here are one of the major contractors in America, the Grumman Corporation, and two, that we send contracts to on a regular basis. And number two, the United States of America Department of the Navy. They're the responsible party for this cleanup. It's been there for 40 years. And it's not a question of the technology. It's a question of going through the bureaucracy of just getting this thing approved. I want to get it off of the Navy's back, write a check to the local authorities, and have them just go clean it up, because you know as well as I do how awful the bureaucracy of the federal government is. It's not because people are bad. It's not because they're incompetent. It's not because they're mean-spirited. It's not because they don't care. It's just an awful, terrible bureaucracy they have to go through. And if we could just get this money and give it to the local authorities, they could get this done, and more people would not suffer from this
Calvert.
site for which the country is responsible for.
Well, I certainly hear the gentleman's passion on this issue. Unfortunately, we have hundreds of these sites, legacy sites, primarily from World War II, that have various pollutants. We certainly have them in California. We have them across the nation. And it's going to cost us billions and billions of dollars. We had a hearing yesterday, Energy and Water, on sites in Idaho and the state of Washington where when we did the Manhattan Project, we were in a hurry. And we have remediation that we're doing in various locations that's going to cost significant amount of resources. I just bring up the other issue too on technology. A lot of these sites we use pump and treat, pump and treat, pump and treat. It takes 30 years, like you just pointed out. We're using microbial technology now in certain areas that have been hugely successful. I would encourage to look at those types of technologies. I don't know the sites specifically, so I can't opine on that, but it has worked. It cleans it up rapidly. So that's what we need to do. We need to change our mindset to get these sites cleaned up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Congressman, let me just point out one thing, if I can, just to make a distinction here. Unlike a lot of the other sites throughout the nation, this is the sole source drinking water supply for this area, because we take our drinking water straight from the groundwater. And it's a heavily populated area. So it's not a remote facility. It's in the middle of people's neighborhood. It was literally one of the sites was a park that was closed down, and this is where we drill right into the ground that's contaminated and pull the water out of there. And this has been going on. We've known about it for 40 years, and I know we've known about other sites for 40 years, but this is, again, in the middle of densely populated areas with drinking water right there.
We will do our very best.
I appreciate it
Thank
so
you
much,
very
Mr. Chairman.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thompson? We're now happy to recognize our colleague, Mr. Thompson. You're free to proceed.
Well, good morning, Chairman Visklowski, Ranking Member Calvert, and all the members of the subcommittee. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to share my priorities for fiscal year 2021 defense appropriations. As members of Congress, meeting the needs of our servicemen and women must remain one of our highest priorities. As the father of a wounded warrior, I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to share my priorities for fiscal year 2021. I recognize the challenge placed before the subcommittee and appreciate your ongoing commitment to our soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen, even when difficult choices must be made. Despite these tough choices, you recognize the troops are on the front lines in danger, defending the freedoms that we all hold so dear. It is imperative our country always maintain the lethality and the strategic edge it has had for decades. Our military should never be engaged in a fair fight. It is for these reasons we must maintain and ensure robust funding for the defense of our nation. The United States military has always had a dominating presence, and maintaining our readiness plays a significant role. Keeping an edge requires our military technologies be a step ahead of our adversaries. In a time when we face unprecedented challenge from near-peer actors who are making strides in the development of hypersonic weapons and other new programs, we must invest in our own advanced technologies, specifically additive manufacturing to support low-cost, optimized precision fires. Additive manufacturing will reduce manufacturing times by 60% at an affordable cost. This requirement is necessary to reduce the weight of the missile systems and optimize the manufacturing process to ensure that the parts in the missiles can be manufactured fast enough without defects at a cost structure that meets the overall U.S. Army missile performance requirements. Additive manufacturing is crucial to our missile defense. As we continue to prepare for the future by optimizing our missile systems, we must also ensure our Navy remains at the tip of the spear by rebuilding and maintaining its capabilities. Our sailors regularly face aggressive actions when navigating our world's waters. The U.S. Navy is making investments into programs ensuring the freedom of navigation for all. Now, some of these programs being invested in and needing continued support include an evolutionary update to the Mk-48 Mod 7 heavyweight torpedo, which will maintain its capabilities while improving range and payload. Additionally, the lightweight torpedo program designs, integrates, and tests the lightweight Mk-54 torpedo to make it more effective in shallow water. Continuing to support these programs gives our sailors the edge that they need to face our adversaries. As a former healthcare professional, I request we continue to support and fund vital Department of Defense research programs. These include research programs for multiple sclerosis, ALS, burn pit exposure, breast and ovarian cancer, and as well as peer-reviewed orthopedic research program. I strongly believe making critical investments in medical research at the federal level will improve the well-being of our nation. Finally, we must keep in mind the more than 80,000 American citizens who served in the Vietnam War, Korean War, and World War II and are still missing in action. The families and friends of these American heroes deserve no less than our greatest efforts to bring their loved ones home. Therefore, I respectfully request the subcommittee support robust funding for the Defense POW-MIA Accounting Agency in the fiscal year 2020. I want to thank the chairman, ranking member, and all the members of the subcommittee for your continued dedication to the matters within the jurisdiction of the subcommittee and the committee as a whole. I really appreciate your consideration of these priorities, and I look forward to working together in the future. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman very much for taking the time to appear, and we share a number of your priorities. I would point out that one of our members who is unable to attend, Mr. Ryan from Ohio, is particularly vocal on a number of things, but particularly additive manufacturing. And I just repeat myself again, I'm from Gary, Indiana. I like to make stuff. And if we don't make those kinds of investments, I tell people we're going to be a stupid country because you aren't going to have to be more efficient next year. You're not going to have to research, all of that. So absolutely supported. I appreciate your emphasis on some of the health programs. And also, you did mention the Defense POW-MIA account, and we increased that to the current fiscal year, $24 million. Interestingly enough, a good friend of mine grew up in the same neighborhood and former U.S. attorney, had an uncle killed in World War II, missing in World War II in Italy. And they think they have found him and his comrade with 2 British soldiers. But for his diligence and the monies available to expand their work, would never have happened. And for that family, the closure is just so incredibly important. So do appreciate your emphasis on that particular.
Chairman, I appreciate your support for that. It is closure for the family, but it's also fulfilling that promise that we made to leave no soldier behind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I thank the gentleman. It's heartening to see some of the manufacturing industries coming back to the United States, and we hope that continues. And I've been with those teams that go out and look for people who are missing in action in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia a number of years ago. And they do a fabulous job in searching the remains, as you say, leave no man behind, and they're fulfilling that pledge. And we need to make sure we fund those efforts. So I thank the gentleman.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Mr. Heck, who has already been very helpful this morning, is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Visklowski, very much, and Ranking Member Calvert, and esteemed members of the House Appropriations Defense Subcommittee. I first want to say how thankful I am, genuinely so, for the funding for the Defense Community Infrastructure Program, known as DCIP, which was included in the final FY20 Defense Appropriations budget. I thank you for that. I thank you for all the essential work that you and your staff do. I am indeed here testifying today in support of the Defense Community Infrastructure Program and asking that this vital program be funded at $100 million in the FY Defense Appropriations Bill. DCIP is a grant program for the federal government to assist state and local governments in addressing defense community infrastructure projects. Grants are meant to support military installations and include a 30% matching requirement for the community. Let's put this in perspective. Over 100 years ago, there were a lot of installations that were developed around this country in what were then rural areas. As time has passed, they found themselves in the midst of urban areas. And as a consequence of 2/3 to 3/4 of all civilian and military personnel living off base, they have added to the problems, stressed the infrastructure in the surrounding communities. I have the privilege, for example, to represent Joint Base Lewis-McChord, the largest force projection base in the western United States. 55,000 people per day report to work there, and the overwhelming majority live in the surrounding communities. So the purpose of DCIP is to help those local communities with infrastructure that assist the base themselves. As a matter of fact, at the end of the day, DCIP is a readiness program that requires significant participation by local communities. It's intended to help those bases and the soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and their families who serve there. This program began when I first entered Congress under title of another name, Commute Act. It has been my highest priority in the appropriations process since I've arrived. Every year I have advocated for this, and I cannot tell you the sense of gratitude and gratification that we first were able to get it authorized and then funded. And my humble request here today is that we take that next step, continue to support it more robustly. I am very proud to have been joined by 51 of my colleagues in a letter of support to you all, including my co-leads, Congressman Chris Smith, Elaine Luria, Don Young, and Jason Crow. They all represent communities that have been heavily impacted and readiness has been compromised. This is a solution to that. I look forward to working with the subcommittee and once again extend to you my deepest appreciation for all your work, your past support of this program, and hopefully your future support of this program.
Mr. Heck, thank you very much. One, appreciate your advocacy and the fact that you had the program authorized. Some people come to us, as you can imagine, and need appropriations and lack the authorization, so that hurdle has been cleared. Also appreciate your advocacy for the fiscal year 20 because the administration asked for no money for the account, and we were able to add $50 million, which I know from your perspective is inadequate. It was the best we could do. Do understand you would like to see it plussed up, and would just note for the record, it is my understanding that for this year's money, for that $50 million, the memo for distribution for the fiscal year 20 funding is on the Secretary of Defense desk awaiting for signature. We do not know what the elements of that is, but we will soon know what that will be. So would ask that you please stay in touch with us, and we will do our best.
Thank you, and again, thank you for your support.
Just going to point out, I've been to Lewis-McChord many occasions. It's a great base, and we love the C-17s, the tankers that are located there, the United States Army that deploy out of that wonderful facility. So we'll do everything we can to help. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We're very proud of the people who work there and serve there.
Thank you very much. Mr. Arrington, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ranking member, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for your leadership and your diligence on this very and possibly most important responsibility to ensure that our armed services have the resources to provide for our nation's defense. And we appreciate all your hard work, and we appreciate you letting us, your colleagues, especially those who have military assets in their districts, provide input into this process. I hail from West Texas and represent 29 counties.
Is that better than East Texas?
Sir, it's better than North, South, and East Texas.
Don't say South Texas, though. Do not
With the
say
exception
South.
with the exception of Laredo, which is connected by I-27 and the ports to plains. No. Listen, bragging is more than a sport, Mr. Chairman. It's a way of life in Texas. But my mama always told me that it ain't bragging if it's true, son. And listen, we have the food, fuel, and fiber. We are the food, fuel, and fiber epicenter of the world in West Texas. No one produces more ag and energy. And from a national security perspective, I just want to make one quick point. Food security and energy independence is national security. And but, you know, we have another component to national security that we preserve and promote and protect in West Texas, and that's the freedom fighters of Dyess Air Force Base in Abilene, Texas. That is the largest B-1 bomber base in the country. It is the training base. It is the operational squadron. It is the classic associate reserve unit, and it is critical to the Air Force air power and air arsenal for the United States defense. And so it's also been referred by the Air Force as the backbone of our Air Force, and its long-range bomber capabilities. It played a critical role in the Afghanistan-Iraq fight against ISIS, and it presented strength and deterrence, American strength and deterrence in the Korean Peninsula, and on and on. I think you get the point. Dyess Air Force Base and the B-1 bomber is critical to this nation's defense. Now, here's the latest, sir. There's been a fatigue testing done, a stress test on these birds, and the Air Force has determined that 17 of the 62 B-1 bombers should be retired based on structural deficiencies. That's a lot of planes for a squadron that provides so much strength and important deterrence and force for the United States defense and the Air Force. And so my request to you and my colleagues is to really dig into this. Look, my first commitment is to the defense of the American people. My second is to, and I'd say second, another priority is the safety of the airmen. So we can't compromise our mission, and we can't compromise the safety of our airmen. And that takes precedence over everything. I'm not just a single-member district guy. I'm an American first, and those are my priorities. However, we've got to be very diligent to determine if the number 17 is the right number, and I haven't seen the data. Doesn't mean I don't trust my leadership at the Air Force. I do, and I do believe there are serious integrity issues. But the question is, can we mitigate that number of 17 down to 10? What's the magic threshold for saying that they should be retired? Should we put them in the boneyard and strip them of their parts, or should we park them in the event that we need them and then rebuild them and fix them so that they can fly if needed? These are just the important questions I know you guys are thinking about, and I just want to reinforce, again, the importance of really analyzing and scrutinizing the data that's coming off of the fatigue testing. Again, if the data suggests that that's what we need to do, and 17 is the right number, I will stand and salute, and I will be a good soldier with you and your colleagues and our friends on HASC. But until I look at those numbers and until I have my colleagues who are experts really dig in, I'm going to maintain that we need to we need to. I'm not willing to accept that final number, if that makes sense. So I think that's pretty much what's in my remarks without reading them word for word. Again, very proud of our airmen. Abilene and the Dias Air Force is part of the Global Strike Command. And they have a competition every year between the communities that host these Air Force bases in Global Strike Command. Abilene, Texas has won it so many times, they changed the award to the stinking Abilene Trophy. So these guys love their airmen, they love our veterans, they want to continue to support them. And oh, by the way, the B-21 bomber, that's the next generation bomber, the Raider. And we just need to get from here to there, from the B-1 and a seamless transition and retirement of the B-1 to the ramping up of the B-21, the most capable bomber the world has ever seen. And I plead with you to really dig in with me, and let's analyze this, and let's make sure that whatever that final number is the right number as we do as we exercise our oversight responsibilities. Mr. Chairman, thanks for indulging me with my comments this morning and my input. Mr. Calvert, thank you as well. Enjoy working with you. And my dear friend, Mr. Cuellar, connected by I-27 and the Ports to Plains corridor, and we're proud of you and your leadership. So thank you, sir.
Thank you for the time to testify, and do appreciate your concern about making sure we take a in-depth look, not just at the B1 and other programs. I have said as recently as yesterday that Congress writ large is one of the problems, because from time to time we do have to make judgments and eliminate programs so we can spend on new technology and new programs. But we ought to be very deliberate about it. Your timing is impeccable because the Air Force will be in for their hearing before this committee the week after we come back from recess. So again, we will make sure we are attentive and draw them out on the issues. Mr. Calvert?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I was going to make the same point the chairman made out, that your timing's good. As you know, the Air Force is relooking the inventory of the United States bomber fleet. We're going to be flying B-52s until they're 100 years old. And that's something. And so the B-1s obviously are going to be replaced by the B-21, and we need to quicken that process up for we can send those B-21s to Texas. And
Amen and
hopefully
amen.
we can have a smooth transition.
Yes.
I know that's what you're concerned about. For the men and women that serve at that base, and they do a wonderful job. So we're certainly going to keep a good eye on it.
Thank you for your comments. You know, the B-1 is a victim of its own success. They used it so much because it was so needed and its capabilities were so critical that they say they flew the wings off of it. And I understand we need to be careful to make the right decision. Ms. McCollum, I enjoyed being with you at West Point and enjoyed our visit there and to get to know you. Thank you for your leadership as well. Again, God bless you guys in your endeavors. Thank you.
Mr. Cuellar would like the
Oh,
last
yes.
word.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you. I've been to the Dias Air Force Base there in Abilene with Dr. Bob Hunter some years ago.
Yeah.
Appreciate your, I think your timing is right. I certainly agree with the chairman, the ranking member, and the rest of the committee. We got to look at this inventory and look at the transition, but really appreciate your work on this. We want to continue working with you. But this is the right timing to take this in-depth look at it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And you will not hold the comments about West Texas as the best Texas against me, will you?
Well, you said with the exception of Laredo.
Thank you.
so
Yes, sir.
I
I'm
took
glad you
that.
kept, for the record, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Great Lakes State.
Oh, Great Lakes State, yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Voskowski and Ranking Member Calvert, Ms. McCollum, and Mr. Cuellar. Thank you very much. I'm here to advocate for military medicine and voice my concern about some certain decisions that have and could be made that might diminish our capabilities to accomplish our three main goals in military medicine, which is one, to have a medically ready force, a ready medical force, and the ability to care for our beneficiaries. And I'm engaging you here today to make sure that our funding decisions align with these needs. You've all heard from the Surgeons General last week, and I share some of their concerns. I have met personally with each of the Surgeons General, as well as General Place of the Defense Health Agency. So a little bit of a bio. I'm an Army reservist still. I've been in for 22 years. I was chief of surgery for Combat Support Hospital stationed at Abu Ghraib Prison in 2005, 2006. Currently, I still serve at Walter Reed, and I'm medical policy advisor for the Chief of the Army Reserve. So I'm speaking from the heart when I'm talking to you today about some of the issues that I'm concerned about. One, I want to make sure that we continue to support our military-civilian partnerships. To give you an example, we created a partnership in Cincinnati with the Army and expanded it to joint, where we embed our medical personnel into our civilian hospitals. And to give you some idea of how that works, we had an Air Force medic from Wright-Patt, largest Air Force base, who spent 2 weeks in Cincinnati, who said, I did more in 2 weeks in Cincinnati than I've done in 6 years of active duty at Wright-Patt. Why? Because he was on air care. He was in ambulances. He was in a level 1 trauma center in the emergency room. These are the types of relationships we have to continue to develop. And so that's why I want to make sure that we are focused on making sure those programs can continue. I also want to speak for a moment how I support the notion and the creation of a Defense Health Command. I think that Congress had good intentions when we developed Defense Health Agency, and I think the Defense Health Agency mission could continue, but I would like to see that under the auspices of a Defense Health Command. The Defense Health Command would consist of a Defense Health Agency director. In my mind, congressional intent with the DHA was to make our stateside and facilities like Onstall more efficient and more effective, more streamlined, to decide how much care we need where, whether we can use community care or not. These are some of the things that we were looking into. So the Defense Health Command, as you'll see on the chart, would consist of Defense Health Agency director, the Surgeons General, and also regional representation, which would give us flexibility. Included in that chart are some of the training opportunities that we would have. I'll be frank with you when I say if you're a reservist and you're a reserved general surgeon in a level 1 trauma center, you're good to go for the combat mission. If you're active duty, you may be on a base or a post where the speed limit's 15, and there really isn't much trauma. So we need to have these types of relationships to build upon. The Air Force has CSTARS, Center for Sustainment and Trauma and Readiness Skills, a very effective program. I participated in that. We have Operation SMART, which I just described before, Strategic Medical Asset Readiness Training. We have the AMCT3, the AMED Military Civilian Trauma Training Teams. These are great training opportunities that we need to expand jointly, and in my mind should be under the management of the Surgeons General, and they can all work together under the guise of a structure of a Defense Health Command. So there's a lot there. I presented a lot to you. I would be more than happy to sit with you one-on-one, or whatever the case may be, to go into more detail about where I think the future of our military medicine should be. I never want our military medicine to be seen as a vulnerability by our enemies. And so we want to do everything we can to have a structure in place that's well-defined, that we can have troops ready to go out the door in a moment's notice, and at the same time, making sure that we're taking care of all of our military families and the military themselves. So I will engage with you on that. I also have a bill that I'll be presenting to HASC for retention, especially in critical specialties. For example, in the Army Reserve right now, we're only at 9% of orthopedic surgeons. That's not a good number. And the same ones get deployed over and over again. At the same time, if you're active duty, you've done 20 years, and you're getting out, eligible for a pension, you may be 45 years old, but if you join the reserve, your pension is penalized. That makes no sense. We should be able to allow people to get the pension that they've earned and go into the Army Reserve, and you bring someone who's already been in uniform, already skilled. And that could be pilots, surgeons, and the way the bill is presented, it has to be identified by the Secretary as a critical shortage of a critical need. So I ask you to take these things into consideration when it comes to appropriations. I'll be glad to take any questions.
Appreciate, again, you taking the time and your concern, as well as, one, the experience and knowledge you bring. We may follow up. The committee has a lot of concerns about the transition that's taking place. And
Medical school bills are huge, even advanced practice nursing, in which we can encourage people to go into medicine and then, you know, maybe go reserve or guard, or maybe make a career of it in the military, is to, you know, if they're talented, is to go into military medicine. So I don't think we've had that big conversation on how that's going to impact. And then we also have a shortage of rural health care, and where some of our bases in that are located, that becomes a question for families in that. So we have questions. Reform and change is difficult. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but I think a little more due diligence needs to happen from my comfort level to make sure that we have adequate response in rural communities where we're posted in that. But I think you bring comments, and say this might not be perfect, but we need.
Appreciate everything that you just said. You know, if we put people through medical school to join the military as a payback, you don't know what specialty they're going to be in, yet our families need every specialty, right? So why do we want to take people out of uniform unnecessarily, in my opinion? And it's a great opportunity in a lot of ways. I'm suggesting right now, if I look at Puerto Rico, Centro Medico, they have they have one trauma center, and it's Centro Medico in San Juan, and they are very short on personnel. If you're an ICU nurse, if you're a surgeon, your opportunities are better in the continental United States than they are in Puerto Rico. But what a great opportunity for our military personnel to be down to the Level 1 Trauma Center and provide the care for the community in the same way that Brooke Army Medical Center does for the community. So these opportunities, you mentioned a burn center. You know, believe me, I served in Iraq. We treat a lot of burns. There's no reason why we can't put some of our medical personnel into that burn center for training and for continued training and become the greater experts. So, and not only that, this is a great opportunity with what's going on with coronavirus. The more we build the military-civilian relationships, the better prepared we can be if there's a natural disaster, an attack on our country, something of that magnitude. This is the way to develop it when there's not a crisis, and we're more prepared. You are spot on, ma'am, and I look forward to talking to you one-on-one or whatever the case may be. Thank you.
thank you very much.
You bet.
No, hey, you planned this out. I know you planned this out. You got something going for yourself. You're welcome to the committee. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman, and members of the committee, and actually I'll where he left it. He went to the Centro Medico in Puerto Rico, and we worked that idea he's bringing with the VA committee during the last term. And I truly support it. I mean, we do have 3 medical schools on the island as well. So there are many options to have that training on site in American soil. Having said that, I want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to actually come in here to present what should be some of the priorities on the island. As being the only representative for Puerto Rico in Congress, one of our main issues is the Fisher House. We have one VA hospital and a network of outpatients clinics to care for close of 84,000 veterans that rely on extended care in increasing numbers. The VA hospital in San Juan cares for veterans from the entire island, but also for the U.S. Virgin Islands. Elderly veterans attending the hospital for extended procedures often need the company of family members for support. and these family members incurs in additional expenses for transportation and lodging. Many of them cannot bear the cost of lodging, and that's the reason I do, and I am pleased that both the VA and the Fisher House Foundation have acknowledged the need and are working to make this project a reality in the island. Therefore, supporting the Fisher House is critical now more than ever for us. Another area, according to the U.S. Department of Education, 1/3 of all Puerto Rican students drop out of high school. The National Guard Youth Challenge Program at Fort Allen, Juana Diaz, reaches individuals who have separated from educational system and connects them with mentors for 17 months and no cost for their families. According to the National Guard Youth Foundation, more than 6,000 individuals have completed the program in Puerto Rico, including almost 200 participants who graduated in March of this year. Funding for the program at $210 million will provide for the Fort Allen Juana Diaz program and 42 other National Guard Youth Challenge programs and 5 current Job Challenge programs across the nation to function. In other area, the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program is responsible for more than 220 direct jobs and indirect jobs nationwide, including 200 of them in Puerto Rico, where my constituents help construct control system software for the F-35. Through one supplier on the island, this program has an economic impact of $17.8 million, of course critical to the island's economy, but as well of our national security. In other areas, I support the request of $56.2 million for funding for the Civil Air Patrol. In the wake, and I never knew how important this organization was until we suffered Hurricanes Irma and Maria. In the wake of those hurricanes, the Civil Air Patrol were instrumental in assessing damage through aerial photography. And FEMA utilized their photos and their information and data to provide faster assessments to areas isolated by disaster damage, while saving a lot of money in overall. The other area that I want to include is the request that the baseline funding for the Department of Defense Innovative Readiness Training Program should be $30 million. In 1 year, the 1st Mission Support Command, the U.S. Army Reserve in Virgin Islands and Puerto Rican soldiers, joined different DoD components in an IRT mission that provided medical services to over 9,000 patients, delivered over 2,000 eyeglasses, and completed over 10,000 medical procedures. Participating units increase readiness and obtain valuable hands-on training experience, while at the same time helping thousands in Puerto Rico. Other area that this committee has been working in the last years, and I ask that the ordinance cleanup on Vieques and Culebra remain a priority of the Appropriations Committee, and again, be included in the report language. I will ask that any steps to accelerate the cleanup currently slated to finish in 2030 be taken. And lastly, I will also like to note my support for the Department of Defense role in healthcare research, including funding for endometriosis, ovarian cancer, breast cancer research, tuberous sclerosis complex, and Gulf War illness treatment. Research on these health issues are vitally important and will have a broad-ranging effects across the economy and the country. These conditions often lack essential research and funding, while individuals seeking relief must rely on the capabilities of the Department of Defense to find effective treatments. And in that end, and with the situation with the coronavirus, there are more than 90 critical medical devices and drugs that are being made and manufactured in Puerto Rico. 44% of our economy is just pharmaceutical and medical devices. Having said that, I think it's an issue of national security to maintain and expand the current research and production of drugs on the island that could be made, and we already have a large footprint of pharmaceutical industry that are working in the U.S. soil instead of having many of them made abroad. In that sense, I think we should expand the pharmaceutical industry and the footprint on the island. We do have the capabilities of making vaccines, of having the medical devices as well as drugs being made on the island, as well as the research. We are the main exporter of drugs from any other state. Puerto Rico is the first one, then California. Having said that, I think we should have a great opportunity to bring a lot of those productions of pharmaceutical and critically needed capabilities on U.S. soil. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much for appearing for your commitment. I would point out, and certainly we agree with your support for Fisher House, that the committee added, I shouldn't say added, but included $11 million from each of the operation maintenance accounts for the services, the Army, Navy, and Air Force for the current year, as well as $10 million in the overall bill for 43. Also, your emphasis on the National Guard Youth Challenge Program. We increased that program, as you may know, and I'm sure you advocated for last year, by $50 million to a total of 200. No guarantee going forward, but certainly appreciate the importance of these and your advocacy very much. Good. Okay.
We all remember our former chairman fondly, Bill Young, and Bill certainly was a champion for Fisher House, as the gentleman remembers, gentlelady, and he would be very supportive, as we are, of trying to help you. I've been to Puerto Rico a number of times. It's a beautiful place, but obviously he has some challenges there, and we need to assist. And I'm all for having more pharmaceutical development within the United States and its territories, because 95% of all vaccines right now are coming out of China. So we need to get more of this domestic capability back within our own control. So I support the gentlelady's efforts on that.
Thank you. And again, we do have the capabilities. You got a large footprint of those pharmaceuticals on the island. I think this is the right time to bring them back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gentleman from Texas. Ms. Jackson Lee, your statement in its entirety will be entered into the record. If you could summarize, we are 20 minutes over our time already, so we would appreciate that. You're recognized.
Good morning to everyone. I just wanted to make a few points of the importance of this committee and the importance of this committee, of course, to the nation's security. Let me recognize both the chairman and the ranking member of this committee. And I know the time frame was not specifically directed to me, but I will try to rush as quickly as I can to ensure that I did not contribute to the 20 minutes over time. The coronavirus is something that we have been told by our health professionals that is not at the end, it's at the beginning and surging. I want to emphasize the importance of the Defense Department in its ability to be innovative. So I have a particular university, Baylor College of Medicine, that has vaccination research ready to go and needs a partner. And I would encourage, I know that this is the next year's fiscal budget, but I'm hoping that the Defense Appropriations can look at the opportunities for partnershiping with the civilian government and making a difference in the lives of civilians. And so Baylor College of Medicine has a vaccination protocol ready to go, and I would hope that there would be some opportunities in the funding for this to go forward. I'd also like to promote in the defense, these are things that I've not noted in my statement, is the issue of soft power. Now that there's been an agreement, which some of us are concerned about with the Taliban, the importance of schools for girls, the importance of working with the Taliban, with the Afghan government on the issues of soft power, of educating individuals against violence, against succumbing to any of the old attitudes of the Taliban, I think will be particularly helpful to our remaining troops and to the safety and security of the Afghan people. I've supported consistently funding for PTSD, and I want to thank the Appropriations Committee for its resources. I always look for increasing that number. It seems that every time in my district, which has a large number of veterans, that PTSD continues to grow. You've also helped me in the past with triple-negative breast cancer in terms of the research. I would like and hope that I could get that focused on in this coming appropriations in terms of the impact it has on military women. I also want to emphasize my support as well for the National Guard Challenge Program. Then I'd like to just speak generally to programs dealing with the research that you do on cancer, and that is the peer-reviewed cancer research program, which I believe is important. The peer-reviewed pancreatic cancer research program, knowing of the surge of pancreatic cancer, the support for the $18 million for kidney cancer research in the congressionally directed medical research program, research for ovarian cancer, $18 million for neurofibrosis, fibromatosis research, or supporting the money for medical care, suicide prevention, which is enormous and growing, and I know there's a way for us to prevent that. $18 million for multiple sclerosis research, $96 million for Department of Defense prostate cancer research, and TBI PTSD research. I think it's been noted of the increase in the veterans and active duty military with those concerns. Peer-reviewed money for Parkinson's disease, autism research, and then $8 million for service dogs for service members and veterans. I'm strong supporter of service dogs, seeing them work. Thank you for that support. And I support the robust funding for the GPS-3 space segment in Air Force procurement, making sure that modern weapons systems, including precise strike munitions, are getting precise navigation. $36 million for procurement technical assistance program, the PTAP, and the $22 million, let me thank you, for the sexual assault prevention program, and then the $33 million for the National Trauma Clinical Research. I'd like to join in my predecessor who was here before talking about stronger relationships between the military and civilian population. The military and defense are overall admired, and there are many opportunities for collaboration. And I would close by saying certainly the coronavirus now raises its head and asks the question how many in the military structure can be helpful as this virus continues to grow. And I know that it depends upon the funding that this committee, this important committee, has offered in terms of flexibility and how they can be utilized. But obviously they are very important not only in our national security, our overseas efforts, but they're certainly important as well to the efforts here in helping our civilians in the domestic life. So I thank you. I'd like to close by just reemphasizing the soft power, which I think is so greatly needed in our efforts around the world. I yield back.
Thank you very much for your advocacy, particularly on the health programs. I would note that you have joined our colleague, Mr. McGovern from Massachusetts, in your advocacy for the service dog program, which is very vital. And again, appreciate your appearance, Mr. Calvert.
I thank the gentlelady. I know that Houston has some of the greatest medical institutions in the world, and be happy to assist and help in any way we can. Thank you.
Thank you. I will pursue that. Baylor is sitting there with 20,000, if I might, 20,000 vials of potential workable vaccines for the coronavirus. They just need to get that partner to get into the lab to be able to do the clinicals. And we're trying to work proactively now. And I know we're in the budget for next year, but proactively now to see if we can get those clinicals done. We'd be very interested. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are adjourned.